регулярные встречи на высоком уровне между двумя сторонами. В декабре текущего года 1,4 миллиарда индийцев с нетерпением вас ждут в Индии для нашего 23-го по счету ежегодного саммита между нашими странами.
एक्सेलेंसी, ये हमारे स्पेशल एंड प्रिविलेज स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की गहराई और व्यापकता का परिचायक है। कठिन से कठिन परिस्थितियों में भी भारत और रूस हमेशा कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चले हैं। हमारा करीबी सहयोग न केवल दोनों देशों के लोगों के लिए बल्कि वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए महत्वपूर्ण है।
Уважаемый господин президент, это свидетельствует о том, насколько глубоким и всеобъемлющим является наше особо привилегированное и стратегическое партнерство. Даже при самых тяжелых обстоятельствах Индия и Россия всегда шли вперед, плечом к плечу. Наше тесное сотрудничество имеет значение не только для народов наших двух стран, но и для обеспечения глобального мира, стабильности и процветания.
एक्सेलेंसी, यूक्रेन में चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय में हम लगातार चर्चा करते रहे हैं। हाल में किए गए शांति के सभी प्रयासों का हम स्वागत करते हैं। हम आशा करते हैं कि सभी पक्ष कंस्ट्रक्टिवली आगे बढ़ेंगे, संघर्ष को जल्द से और स्थायी शांति स्थापित करने का रास्ता खोजना होगा। ये पूरी मानवता की पुकार है। एक्सेलेंसी, एक बार फिर आपका मैं हृदय से बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूँ।
Уважаемый господин президент, по теме продолжающегося конфликта на Украине мы регулярно обмениваемся мнениями. Мы приветствуем все недавно предложенные усилия для установления мира и надеемся, что все стороны будут подходить к этому вопросу конструктивно. Необходимо искать пути для скорейшего завершения конфликта и установления мира. Это и есть призыв всего человечества. Ваше превосходительство, дорогой друг, еще раз большое спасибо. Очень рад вас видеть.
Спасибо.
धन्यवाद.
All right, Niranjan, very important, clear-cut, contour-driven statements, opening statements by both the leaders. My takeaway, number one, President Putin, he called Prime Minister Priya Dost. These are pictures from earlier when the two delegations came in, and President Putin addressed Prime Minister, or began addressing the Prime Minister by calling him a dear friend, Priya Dost. And then he said, December 21, I think he gave away the date when he would be traveling to India. He said it's a strategic, marks 15 years, December 21 this year marks 15 years of Russia's, India's special global strategic partnership. And so, and it's a multi-dimensional cooperation spanning trade, tourism, international coordination on UN, BRICS, SCO. Then he said the meetings that take place regularly between the two sides firm up the relationship even further. He called the India-Russia partnership one of deep trust. Then he said that it is bipartisan and it goes beyond the domestic politics. Those were the opening comments of President Putin. My most important takeaway is that he said that it's a long-standing relationship. The same thread got reflected when Prime Minister Modi started speaking. He said that every meeting with President Putin is memorable and insightful. And he emphasized that we are in regular touch. Now, that's a significant takeaway because given the headwinds that we have been facing on our trade with Russia on oil from the Americans, for Prime Minister Modi to underscore that we are in regular touch. And then he, of course, said that we wait to welcome you in December. Then he said that despite all the difficulties, so double underscoring there by Prime Minister Modi of the strength of the relationship with Russia, that despite the difficulties we have faced, we have remained steadfast in this relationship. And the reason is that it is important for world peace and progress that we stay together. So I think there is a clear, unequivocal message to the Americans that no messing around with the India-Russia friendship, and that all the singling out that the Trump administration has done is not going to make India waver in its connect with Russia. And then he says, of course, he mentioned Ukraine in 3 sentences, because that's significant, because of the 20 sentences, 3 are dedicated to Ukraine, where he said, we have spoken often on Ukraine. India welcomes all efforts that have been made recently to bring peace, and it's important for humanity's sake, Niranjan, that the war stops and ceasefire prevails. I think very significant, very measured, and very statesmanly comments there coming in from Prime Minister Modi.
Well, this is the third or fourth time that they're meeting at the SCO Summit, and the bonhomie is there. You see, each time they meet, all smiles. They share a very deep relationship, both Prime Minister Modi and Vladimir Putin. Let me go across also. If Shawan is there, we'll try and get him live on these pictures. The bilateral continues. The opening statements. What we will also do is we will go across and get the opening statements of Einar Tangen, Andrew K.P. Leung and Major Samar Partoor. And while we do that, we'll also get the full statements of both sides. We'll play out those statements immediately after getting the opening statements. Einar, I'll start with you, and then Andrew can take it, and then I'll get Major Partoor as well. Your opening statements on what you just heard there between both leaders.
Well, clearly, the relationship, you couldn't have more different optics than anything with Donald Trump, where it tends to be him sitting in the Oval Office and you having to, compliant countries having to praise him and promise him things. This is extremely natural. You can look at their body language and you can clearly see not only the optics, but also the substance of what they're talking about. This is not new. This is a continuation. This is going to give Washington nightmares.
Yeah. Andrew and then Major Partoor, quick comments.
I think that as far as the relationship with Russia is concerned, India is walking a very tight rope over Ukraine because the Trump administration has just imposed extraordinarily high secondary tariffs on India for buying Russian oil, even though that does not apply to China. Now, the difference, of course, is India started to buy Russian oil only after, to a vast amount of Russian oil, only after the Ukraine war. Whereas in the case of China, China and Russia have been joined at the hip economically, and then the two sides are trading with one another. Russia is the world's biggest export of energy and as agricultural products, and China is the biggest customer. So this economic relationship dates back well before the Ukraine war. Here lies the difference. But however, the second the challenge for India in this relationship with Russia is, of course, that he makes reference to the United Nations. And also, this is also a tightrope for China as well, because even though India is a very close partnership with Russia, buying Russian arms, for example, and also increasing trade, and China particularly, of course, is a all-weather partnership. But then the Russian military operation in Ukraine, of course, tramples upon Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine, after all, is a country recognized by the United Nations. So I think that's why Modi makes a very careful reference, even if brief, to the United Nations Charter. But on the other hand, there is no doubt that Modi is pivoting towards Russia as an answer to Americans' hegemonic coercion and bullying. And then this bullying is not only against its perceived existential threat, which is Russia and China, but also against its long-term allies like India, and of course the transatlantic relationship, including European Union countries. And hence, the whole world order has been totally upended. The world order, which was founded and led by the United States since the Second World War, based on a rule-based, commonly accepted rules, has now been discarded in favor of American unilateralism, coercion, and bullying. As I said, I'm not only against perceived rivals, but also against allies, and also countries in the global south, and which are poor, mostly developing countries wanting to protect their development interests, and hence this rallying behind the under the umbrella of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah.
Of course, the SCO is very different now in the couple of years in the past compared with what it was, say, even a couple of years ago, because it's now expanded from just Russia, China, and the landlocked countries in Central Asia to embrace countries in the middle corridor, for example, Azerbaijan and Armenia, but also Turkey and Egypt, and also Middle East, very rich countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, but also countries like Turkey and Egypt, as well as additional countries in Asia. So all the key players in the global south are in the SCO. And of course, India is trying to recalibrate its relationship with the United States, but also recalibrating its relationship with China. And of course, there's forming a closer relationship with Russia as an answer to President Trump's bullying.
Okay, so should we play out the full statements again? Okay, we have the statements of both Prime Minister Modi and Vladimir Putin. We'll just play that out and then go across to Major Tour. All right. Meanwhile, as we play that, quickly also there is a full handout that's now coming in from the government, from the PIB of the Prime Minister's statements at the 25th SCO Summit in Tianjin. We'll get you that as well. At the bottom of the screen, here's what the Prime Minister said, opening statement with Putin. Vladimir Putin and the Prime Minister during the bilateral in Tianjin.
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, дорогие друзья, мы очень рады нашей встрече.
आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, साथियों, आपसे मिलकर हमें बड़ी खुशी हो रही है।
Символично, что она проходит на полях саммита ШОС.
ये बहुत प्रतिमात्मक है कि वो SCO शिखर सम्मेलन से इतर हो रही है।
Организация, которая позволяет объединять усилия глав государств глобального Юга и Востока.
ये एक संगठन है जो ग्लोबल साउथ और ईस्ट के देशों के नेताओं को प्रयास मिलाने को एक मंच प्रदान करता है।
Усилия по созданию в Евразии архитектуры равной и неделимой безопасности.
यूरेशियन में समान और अविभाज्य सिक्योरिटी ढांचे को बनाने के लिए प्रयासों के लिए एक मंच प्रदान करता है।
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, дорогой друг, 21 декабря исполняется 15 лет со дня принятия совместного заявления, в котором отмечен выход наших отношений на уровень особого привилегированного стратегического партнерства.
महामहिम प्रधानमंत्री जी, प्रिय दोस्त, 21 दिसंबर को 15 साल पूरे हो जाएंगे जब से एक संयुक्त वक्तव्य पर हस्ताक्षर किए गए थे, जिसमें हमारे स्पेशल प्रिविलेज्ड पार्टनरशिप पर किस तरह हम पहुंचे। 15 साल हो गए।
И можно уверенно констатировать, что многоплановые российско-индийские связи активно развиваются на этих принципах.
और हम ये सच्चाई से बता सकते हैं कि हमारे रिश्ते इस सिद्धांतों पर बढ़ते हैं।
Налажено многоуровневое взаимодействие.
हमारे बीच बहुत बहुमुखी सहयोग चालू है।
Торгово-экономическая кооперация в целом демонстрирует положительную динамику.
व्यापार में सकारात्मक गतिशीलता देखने को मिलती है।
Развивается туристический обмен.
पर्यटकों का आदान-प्रदान विकसित हो रहा है।
Мы тесно координируем наши усилия на международной арене.
अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मंच पर हम हमारे प्रयासों को समन्वय से करते हैं।
Это ООН, БРИКС, группа 20 и, разумеется, ШОС.
UN, BRICS, SCO जरूर इस गठन में से शामिल हैं।
И сегодня хорошая возможность обсудить основные задачи дальнейшего развития многопланового двустороннего сотрудничества в различных областях.
और आज की मुलाकात से हमारे रिश्तों को आगे बढ़ाने पर रास्तों पर बातचीत करने का एक बहुत अच्छा मौका मिलता है।
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, дорогой друг, Россия и Индия поддерживают десятилетиями особые отношения, дружеские, доверительные. Это фундамент для развития наших отношений в будущем.
आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, प्रिय दोस्त, रूस और भारत के बीच बहुत विश्वसनीय रिश्ते बने हुए हैं। इस सिद्धांतों पर वे विकसित हो रहे हैं।
И эти отношения носят абсолютно внепартийный характер, поддерживаются подавляющим большинством народов наших стран.
और ये किसी से पार्टी या राजनीति पर आधारित नहीं है। लोग, हमारे दो देशों के लोग इस रिश्तों का समर्थन करते हैं।
Спасибо.
धन्यवाद।
मैं हमेशा अनुभव करता हूं कि आपको मिलना मतलब एक यादगार मीटिंग भी होती है, बहुत सी चीजों की जानकारियों का आदान प्रदान करने का अवसर मिलता है। हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। दोनों पक्षों के बीच नियमित रूप से कई उच्च स्तरीय बैठकें भी हुई है। इस वर्ष दिसंबर में हमारी 23वीं समिट के लिए 140 करोड़ भारतीय उत्सुकता पूर्वक आपका इंतजार कर रहे हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, ये हमारी स्पेशल एंड प्रिविलेज स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की गहराई और व्यापकता का परिचायक है। कठिन से कठिन परिस्थितियों में भी भारत और रूस हमेशा कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चले हैं। हमारा करीबी सहयोग न केवल दोनों देशों के लोगों के लिए बल्कि वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए महत्वपूर्ण है। एक्सेलेंसी, यूक्रेन में चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय में हम लगातार चर्चा करते रहे हैं। हाल में किए गए शांति के सभी प्रयासों का हम स्वागत करते हैं। हम आशा करते हैं कि सभी पक्ष कंस्ट्रक्टिवली आगे बढ़ेंगे, संघर्ष को जल्द से जल्द खत्म करने और स्थायी शांति स्थापित करने का रास्ता खोजना होगा। ये पूरी मानवता की पुकार है। एक्सेलेंसी, एक बार फिर आपका मैं हृदय से बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूं।
Yeah, they say that we're oiling the Russian war machine. There you have Prime Minister Modi telling Putin, end the war, saying we want to see an end to the war. Major Tur, another highlight from the Prime Minister's opening address there, talking about the energy partnership. In fact, that's one of the highlights of what he said. He mentioned the energy partnership with Russia, and we're not going to stop. In fact, there are some reports that suggested that we may, in fact, contrary to American demand, increase oil purchase in September.
You see, Niranjan, firstly, Russia definitely acknowledges that when the world came upon India, the amount of pressure that India faced to stop the oil purchases, there were a lot of allegations on India. But you see, the reason why Russia's unconditional support to India is now showing is because India has kept an independent stand and did not succumb to the orders or the wishes of any other third country or be dictated terms as to how to do trade.
Yeah.
Reason being why I emphasize on this point over and over again is that the dollar has not been re-evaluated despite other economies progressing and doing well. The dollar remains to be very dominant. It is becoming difficult for the developing nations who are almost developed to have any equation of trade with the West. So the West must realize that it has to create a balance. It has to grant a credit to the developing nations that they have progressed, which they are not doing. And by not doing or acknowledging, they are suppressing the economies and trade, and they are bending the rules. They are putting in tariffs and the pressures, which are definitely going to make the relations sour. Now, why India is become a criticality in Eurasia is because India strategically and geopolitically has an important relevance in terms of any trade which enters Asia, number one. Number two, the reason why India is being acknowledged as a responsible country is because we did not let our land be given as a military base to any of the foreign militaries, which would have definitely made relations in Asia very complex. South Korea has already done it. There are a lot of issues which are already going on in the Korean Peninsula. Japan is already having issues with China. Philippines is facing a lot of issues. Australia's stance is not clear in the Quad. So, see, in terms of the West, the streamlining of strategic alliances is in a tizzy. They are not really able to get in alliances. And see, as we speak, Taiwan is being militarized by America every day. It is a fact. But one more thing is that Americans will definitely not want to take on China. They are already on the verge of taking on Venezuela. And there have been so much of political interference by the Americans in South American nations and the governments. So I think the tipping point has come, and it is a responsible role for mature countries to take a call, an independent call, and take the mature and the right side. And Prime Minister Modi has been harping upon peace between Ukraine and Russia. He's the only leader who's told President Putin upfront, face to face, that this is not the era of war. Please stop the war. And I think that Zelensky has also measured the odds and knows that Prime Minister Modi has more weightage, more relevance and importance compared to President Trump, who's lost his relevance by changing his statements every day. So a mature and a stable leadership is which stands by its statements but does not change it every day. That shows a confusion or doubt in decision making. So I definitely feel that all the Asian countries are coming together in a decisive and a progressive direction. And as far as issues between China and India are concerned, I definitely feel that if India brokers a mature role in brokering peace between Russia and Ukraine, I am very confident that President Putin will definitely broker a once and for all settlement between China and India in terms of its border issues, which is the key issue. And after that, I'm sure things are going to be streamlined, and we will respect each other's political and diplomatic stances in the times to come.
Okay, I'm going across to Shravan now. Shravan, you've heard the opening statements. I think they've laid out the agenda very clearly on expected lines. Of course, Energy made a mention of the kind of relations that India and Russia share. Most importantly, I think following that phone call with Zelensky on Saturday, there is a clear intent from India to end the war. In as many words, saying we want to see an end to the war at the earliest. Shravan?
I believe, Niranjan, we are up for a surprise very soon, because what has essentially transpired in the last few hours here at Tianjin could be extremely significant for the geopolitical conditions. The reasons are the following. One, the fact of the matter is that America essentially did not realize that we are going to be able to amend our ties with China, which does not augur well for the Americans. Number one. Number two is the strengthening of our ties with Russia, which also enables us to have a far larger maneuvering room in the Central Asian countries too. So remember, it is going to be multiple targets that we have basically achieved in terms of a free market. There is no doubt about the fact that it only opens up more space and emerging markets for us to do business, and this has been something that India has been working on the sidelines. Now, the big takeaways undoubtedly from the joint declaration, and something, Niranjan, we at Republic TV have been constantly reporting, and we have got it bang on, that terrorism was one of the main factors, and in fact the joint declaration would have indicated the same. Interestingly, if you actually join the dots, look at what President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi had essentially discussed yesterday during the bilateral on the sidelines of the SCO Summit. What were the words that were essentially used? And look at the same very words which have now found a mention in the joint declaration. What does that mean? I'll leave it to the analysts there for their better understanding. I'm only sticking to my reporting here. The fact of the matter is that these are words that have, for the first time, you would have actually heard from the Chinese, where they're talking about terrorism, they're talking about extremism, they're talking about separatism. patriotism. All of it now finds a mention in the joint declaration. Then you actually move a step forward. Pahalgam has been condemned by everyone. And who is this everyone that we are talking about? Those nations that Pakistan essentially thought they were their own friends. Those Muslim nations which they believed was going to be on their side. The Central Asian countries, remember, have also not been extremely favorable to India. But having said that, they've all come around. Of course, Russia plays a very, very important role in maneuvering them. And of course, with the Chinese now stepping in. So look at where we stand today. For all those back home who have been arguing that we have failed in diplomacy, our diplomacy is essentially failing, we're not being able to have allies, I believe they will have to shut their mouth, simply because the imagery that is coming in now from yesterday night when the banquet was hosted by President Xi to today's powerful imagery of the triad, that becomes abundantly clear. Then the personal touch of the Prime Minister in the diplomacy that he brings in. When you have Prime Minister Modi sitting in that same very limousine along with the Russian President, it again goes a step forward, that too without a translator. The last that President Putin did was in America, where the stakes were higher for the American president. But here it is about an equalizer factor. What we have essentially seen today is an equalizing factor here, where Russia has never pushed around their way, despite being a powerful nation. Remember, Russia has always treated India as an equal partner, and that was reflected in today's imagery. Cut to the opening remarks of the Prime Minister. Prime Minister once again recalling, the fact that during difficult times too, we have walked shoulder to shoulder. And then, of course, President Putin bringing in the fact that from Vladivostok to Chennai, the kind of links that we have essentially had, that is essentially reflected in our relationship and the way there has been economic prosperity. So in a nutshell, this by far has been the most successful summit for India.
Shravan, we have Einar and Andrew KP Leung, Einar Tang and Andrew KP Leung and Major Tour. You can take some questions with them as well, because they've been waiting as well. You can go to maybe Einar and then to Andrew on what you're saying. You can take it with them. Over to you, Shravan.
Sorry, is the question
Einar,
to me?
It's been a surprise for many. Yeah, Einar, I'm taking the question with you.
Yeah.
I want you to perhaps help us understand, what's the long-term goal for the Chinese? Because let's be clear something. Forget about the sugarcoating that has actually happened. Let's now get to brass tacks of it. India certainly wants a clear resolution when it comes to our border. Second, we are adamant on the fact that we need to go back to the 2020 situation. Do you think the Chinese are ready for it?
No, but I hate to disagree with you, but if you start looking at the statements of both Xi and Putin, they're not talking about what's in India's interest. They're acknowledging a friendship. They're acknowledging that they have trust, but they're talking about the greater world. I mean, India is not the only one who is suffering here. So I think this idea of making this parochial, what's good for India, who's going to back us, that might play well in the domestic quarters. But the fact is, this is much larger than that. And as I have said before to you, this is an opportunity for India and Modi to step forward and talk about how the world needs to change. I mean, obviously, you cannot go up to the United States and change it as long as it feels it's in control. The only way you can change the United States is be the bigger bully. Come with other nations, not just China and Russia. Don't forget South Africa. Don't forget Brazil. They have the same 50% tariffs. Don't forget the other 5 nations, and don't forget the global South. India has a proud heritage of creating the non-aligned movement. This is the culmination, the moment when India can step forward and say, look, we tried to balance, East and West. We tried to make sure that, things didn't get out of control, but they have. And now we have to step forward and say enough. And I think that's the message here. I don't think you get getting into these nitty-gritty things of what's good for India is necessarily what China and Russia have been talking about. Talking about shared future, a changing world system, predictability, safety, security, development. So I think we should concentrate on those issues.
I beg. Einar, I beg to differ on the position that you've essentially taken by saying that this is not a reductionist way of looking at it. We're talking about the bilateral. Of course, it's for the larger good of the SCO partners. But having said that, Andrew, I want to bring you in and perhaps draw it further, because we ought to look into the minutiae here. That if you want a lasting peace, that lasting peace can only happen when you resolve some of the key issues. And the Prime Minister was very, very clear in his talks with President Xi, where he's made it very clear that you can't move on without resolving the border issues. There have been frameworks in place. Let's be honest here, they have been violated. The trust deficit does exist. Let's be very clear here. There may be a lot of excitement all around, but we'll have to, perhaps tone it down to come and brace the reality that we still haven't got to a position where we have been able to reduce our troops.
Well, of course, the SCO is a multilateral forum, not just for India or China, but the Global South, and trying to create a fairer, a more just, and more cooperative world order, in spite against President Trump's unilateralism and bullying. So that's the main theme of the whole SCO. But you're talking bilateral relationship, and I'd like to address very important points there. As far as bilateral relations with China, there is no way that you can resolve this huge historical differences between the two countries on a piece of paper. I mean, the two sides need to scale down the conflict, as what happened in recent months between the two leaders, to scale down the conflict in the border so as to create a positive environment for continuing dialogue. But I don't think that you expect the China to concede on, for example, Tibet. As I said at the beginning, Tibet is a long established historical, perhaps unfortunate collision, and that's caused by the British India. I mean, Tibet, if you look at history, it was part of the same province, but now half of it has now become a province of India. So I think that both sides could, the best to hope for is to agree to disagree, and then try to prevent conflicts and work on areas of cooperation. Now, as far as the bilateral with Russia, let's face it, who are the main levers to end the war? I don't think it's China. I don't think it's India either. I think that you can see that the war is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. And then, of course, Russia, with military operations, of course, is a contravention with the United Nations Charter. But of course, there's a lot of double standards in the case of the United States as well. And now the supply of arms and ammunition is from America. And then the European Union countries, fearful of Russia's influence, are involved. And so they are the main levers. And of course, Zelensky is now being marginalized by Trump, who wants to end the war. But of course, Russia is also trying to push the envelope as well, the gains on the ground. So it's more complicated. And then, of course, what India and China hope for, of course, is a peaceful Ukraine. And then hoping for a ceasefire. So I think that there's a lot of negotiations are still carrying on. And then it depends on the main levers of power in this long-standing proxy war. So I think that, anyway, coming back to the SCO, it's not about a bilateral so much, even though bilaterals are important. It's about creating a just and fairer and more cooperative world order.
Okay,
No, I do understand that you are influenced by the Chinese history and particularly with regards to Tibet. Now, there is a differing opinion on that matter. I'm not getting into the specific of it. I completely understand that you're influenced by your own history, but the understanding is very, very different. Having said that, yes, at no point in time have I said that the SCO summit is about India and China. Of course, the fact that they are the most influential partners here and the bilateral talks that have essentially taken place and they've become the global headlines. Nikita, if I can bring you in with regards to the role that Russia has essentially played. I want to focus a little bit about the RIC because a lot of talk is actually going on that there's a possibility of a trilateral to take place, and the stage has now been set after a very, very successful SCO summit where what India essentially wanted, what China essentially wanted has now been fulfilled, which puts Russia in a great position to now take this forward. Of course, with the Russian president extended his stay, there is much more that's going to happen tomorrow in Beijing.
As far as I understand, the role of the Beijing consultations is to build a new international system of trade and international relations. Because the actual system, based on the World Trade Organizations and other structures controlled by United States, became a weapon of the tyranny, of the control over other countries. In fact, we see at the Ukrainian case that United States using those positions to implement sanctions against everyone who backs Russian will for sovereignty, who is ready to continue trade with Russia and Russian allies. Of course, it means that, in fact, the United States is not now actually act as a gangster. So we have no choice but to build our new system based on respect, sovereignty, and equality of all countries. Nobody has a right to judge are we democracy or not, how we should run our internal policy, and how we should build our international trade relations. This is the main goal of this summit, in my honor opinion. Of course, I think that a lot of other topics is going to be discussed because, for example, Russia is now a goal of United States aggression. As my colleague said here, a proxy war run in Ukraine after a coup d'etat in 2014, when an American puppet government take control in Kyiv. At the same situation, we see the United States and NATO aggression against Iran, against other countries, and in fact, all of our nations are under the threat. Because, for example, we remember that even China, a big and strong state, is under threat of American aggression in the case of Taiwan. So, in my opinion, we should be most closer we can to defend our liberty, to run our relations an independent way, and take it away from the control of the so-called Western states. We are not colonies. We are not those slaves. We want to be free. We want to prosper. It is our goal.
Okay, we're getting in some breaking news, Shravan, that the Modi-Putin meeting has just ended. That's a breaking news update coming in. That bilateral that began roughly about 40 minutes ago. Shravan, has it lasted about 40 minutes, roughly 30 to 40 minutes? That meeting has now ended. What's the location of that bilateral, Shravan? From where you are, how far is it?
Well, in fact, it's at the hotel where Russian President Vladimir Putin is staying. That's the Ritz-Carlton, which is roughly about 20 to 25 minutes away from the Beijing Convention Center where we're currently broadcasting from. It's also the venue of the SCO Summit. So soon after the bilateral, Prime Minister Modi will be wheels up for Delhi after a very, very successful meeting that he has essentially had, Niranjan. And in fact, all the objectives that India had basically laid out for themselves and the diplomatic team had basically cut out for themselves, the task that was cut out has now clearly been achieved. And if I can just quickly, in a nutshell, take it forward and then perhaps bring in Major Sabarpal Toor also. Major Sabarpal Toor, I believe that having this kind of a discussion with the Russians, particularly at a time where there's going to be enhanced defense cooperation in terms of the fighter jet acquisition and more importantly, the S-400 defense missile system, which I'm given to understand the second batch is also going to come in. I'm not too sure whether at all the brass tacks of it has been discussed, but it's clear that with regards to the Russian defense cooperation, that too is on a high.
Well, Shravan, you see, presently what is happening is that there is an overhauling and upgrade
महामहिम प्रधानमंत्री जी प्रिय दोस्त 21 दिसंबर को 15 साल पूरे हो जाएंगे जब से एक संयुक्त वक्तव्य पर हस्ताक्षर किए गए थे जिसमें हमारे स्पेशल प्रिविलेज्ड पार्टनरशिप पर किस तरह हम पहुंचे 15 साल हो गए.
И можно уверенно констатировать, что многоплановые российско-индийские связи активно развиваются на этих принципах.
और हम ये सच्चाई से बता सकते हैं कि हमारे रिश्ते इस सिद्धांतों पर बढ़ते हैं.
Налажено многоуровневое взаимодействие.
हमारे बीच बहुत बहुमुखी सहयोग चालू है.
Торгово-экономическая кооперация в целом демонстрирует положительную динамику.
व्यापार में सकारात्मक गतिशीलता देखने को मिलती है.
Развивается туристический обмен.
पर्यटकों का आदान प्रदान विकसित हो रहा है.
Мы тесно координируем наши усилия на международной арене.
अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मंच पर हम हमारे प्रयासों को समन्वय से करते हैं.
Это ООН, БРИКС, Группа 20 и, разумеется, ШОС.
UN, BRICS, SCO जरूर इस गताओं में से शामिल हैं.
И сегодня хорошая возможность обсудить основные задачи дальнейшего развития многопланового двустороннего сотрудничества в различных областях.
और आज की मुलाकात से हमारे रिश्तों को आगे बढ़ाने पर रास्तों पर बातचीत करने का एक बहुत अच्छा मौका मिलता है.
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, дорогой друг,
Россия и Индия поддерживают десятилетиями особые отношения, дружеские, доверительные. Это фундамент для развития наших отношений в будущем.
आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी प्रिय दोस्त रूस और भारत के बीच बहुत विश्वसनीय रिश्ते बने हुए हैं. इस सिद्धांतों पर वे विकसित हो रहे हैं.
И эти отношения носят абсолютно внепартийный характер, поддерживаются подавляющим большинством народов наших стран.
और ये किसी से पार्टी या राजनीति पर आधारित नहीं है. लोग हमारे दूरदर्शन के लोग इस रिश्तों का समर्थन करते हैं.
Спасибо.
धन्यवाद.
Okay, we're going across to the statement coming in. This is a statement of India. This is a handout that's given following the bilateral. It's a 4-point statement highlighting a couple of points, and then Kritar can take it from there. The Prime Minister, the government, the Press Information Bureau putting out details saying Prime Minister Modi